Hi there, this is Heather Scott, and in this presentation I will be talking about some key concepts of project-based learning in the classroom, PBL, and all the information in this presentation has been provided by Susie Boss and Jane Cross from their book, Reinventing Project-Based Learning. Throughout this presentation, we'll be looking at some essential components such as how to plan and prepare, how to design your project, and ultimately how to assess the student's learning. To plan and prepare for your project, you want to start by identifying the core concepts and processes that are important to the subject content. You want to develop a concept framework in preferably an online blog. You want to implement curriculum goals using textbooks and other curriculum materials, as well as addressing your students' needs, whether that is modifications or just knowing what your students already know and what they need to know, as well as encouraging some learning dispositions that are best learned through experiences and encouragement that project-based learning provides for them. Keep in mind your Common Core state standards and make sure that you are implementing those into your formative and summative assessments throughout your project. And I highly recommend that you collaborate with your colleagues and with professionals from the field to get both their opinion on your plan as well as some additional information to enrich the projects. As you plan and prepare, you want to ask yourself what all of this adds up to. Make sure that you have a clear path and framework for your project. Make sure that everything that you're implementing is important and has important learning outcomes. And think about who is affected by the project. Who interacts with this topic with their work or with their daily lives? What kind of impact is it going to have on the real world? Some important learning dispositions that students can learn through project-based learning include confidence, risk-taking, resourcefulness, curiosity, resilience, self-reflection, courage, cooperation, persistence. Perhaps the most important dispositions that students can learn are grit, such as a sense of industry, as well as self-control, such as not getting frustrated or giving up when faced with an obstacle throughout your project. Plan for your project to be authentic, which in this case means that the activities take place in the real world. When students know that their project has a real world value, they actually become more invested in the learning process. Your project should be interdisciplinary, which also means that it's authentic. If it doesn't naturally occur that way, as the teacher, you should be intentionally planning milestones or assessments to focus on the different subjects that you wish for your students to learn throughout the project. And being a project, that means that you're going above and beyond the traditional means of paper and pen. Your students are having hands-on experiences and actually learning by doing. And in this case, it means that your students will be having opportunities to practice their higher order thinking. According to Bloom's taxonomy, higher order thinking involves the ability to analyze, evaluate, and create. So your students are provided with those opportunities throughout their project. Plan for digital age skills. So going beyond the ability to read and write, your students should have access when you plan and prepare for research, making their ideas visible and expressing ideas creatively. Plan for a way for your students to collaborate. You want them to have some project maintenance, so you need to decide what kind of resources that you are going to provide for them, as well as a space and method for them to reflect and iterate their projects. which all should be supported by study and enrichment materials such as textbooks or videos and lectures that they can use throughout the process. Moving on to project design. Since you've already tackled your conceptual framework in your planning and you know your students' zone of proximal development, so that means you know what they know and what they need to know. We are now moving on to project theme or challenge and how to ignite inquiry within your students. So for your project theme or challenge, to come up with your idea, it's highly recommended that you review completed projects either from your own past or from your colleagues or even the online resources. If you see something that you like, but it doesn't quite meet the goals that you have for your students, it is recommended that you just remodel or tweak the project to your standards in order to create that significant learning. You also want to design a way that students can express their learning. What would that look like? Perhaps this is the good time to write out a project sketch. Moving on from the framework that you started in the planning phase, you are now going to start adding in more details and such as collecting and tracking assets online. So if there's any information that your students need for them to go forward with their projects, that this is the time for you to collect that information. So if you're trying to decide whether or not you have a good theme or a challenge for your students, it's a good idea to ask yourself these questions. Does the project plan include samples of students' work? Will students be able to master the rigorous content? Will engaging in the content help students to become more independent learners, learn to make inquiries, carry out effective research and make new meaning, teach to and learn from others, as well as being able to use tools for important purposes? So if you were to able to answer yes to all those questions, then you probably have a really good project theme or challenge in mind, and you're ready to move forward to those next steps, such as igniting student interest and inquiry. How do you get your students excited about this project? Well, try to think of it as replacing the word project with the word passion. You want to make sure that your students are having a quality experience and they're headed in an authentic direction. Give the project an appealing name or let them come up with their own name. Steer them towards resources. Don't necessarily give them all the answers, but provide them with resources so that they can move forward. Have a design that's flexible enough that allows students to move in different directions or learning paths, but still guide them to stay focused towards those learning objectives. So it's recommended that you start with an open-ended question and let the students' interests and curiosities drive the learning experience by letting them come up with sub-questions, and then they investigate their own ways to answer their own questions. Because they believe in what they're doing, they're going to be even more motivated and invested in their project. So to help your students come up with iterative work, you want to design a system of feedback, reflection, and revision, cycles of improvement. And you might want to use an online application such as Google Docs that allows you and your students' peers to provide each other with feedback instantaneously, keeping the progress moving. As you design your project, keep in mind these potential pitfalls. You want to make sure that it's not too long on activities or short on learning outcomes, that technology is not prioritized over the learning outcomes, that you aren't using trivial themed units or that it's not too overly script with too many steps. There's not enough focus on formative assessments. So you want to make sure that you're measuring their progress throughout the whole process and not just waiting until the end to figure out that they don't understand what they're doing. Also, you want to um, make sure your assessments do feel authentic and they're not overly used. You want to use different methods to examine what your students are learning and not just using the same 5-question quiz format every day. Bringing us to assessments, how do you assess something that's so novel and unique? If your students are allowed to go in different directions and according to what they're interested in and what kind of questions they're trying to answer, how do you assess that? Well, you're going to go through a natural process of supporting and reporting on their learning, of course. And that means that throughout the project cycle, you are providing students with formative assessments that allow you to adjust the project or address misunderstandings and guide their efforts in a new direction headed towards success. So plan your formative assessments as milestones or checkpoints throughout the process so your students can reflect and grow in their knowledge and their skills. A summative assessment, however, is done at the end of the project to measure how much your students have learned and evaluate the quality of the project. This is done in a cycle of objectives, activities, and evidence. So first you set your objectives, what your students are going to learn throughout the project. Then you provide them with some activities and approaches that they can take to go from not knowing to knowing. And then they show you the evidence of what they've learned by demonstrating through possibly a presentation or a book that they've made or whatever form of summative assessment you choose. You may be wondering what some of these projects could look like. And so I've listed here a few of the examples that are referenced out of Susie's book, and those include writing letters to real organizations, making an innovation or an invention, making a portfolio, giving a public testimony, and so on and so forth. If you are looking for a good resource that gives you some project ideas as well as implementing some Common Core standards, then I have listed a site here for you to check out. I've also provided some examples of project-based rubrics. So depending on if you're looking for concept, knowledge, skills that your students have gained, or possibly some of the processes that they are going through, here are some rubric examples, whether they've done an exemplary job or only very limited knowledge of the goals. And so you would fill in here what each of these categories would look like if they're exemplary or if they're proficient or if they're just emerging or if they're limited. What would that look like under each of these categories? So that's what you fill in as the teacher. Online feedback is also very important. By using something like Google Classroom, you give students, parents, and teachers all a way to effectively communicate and give feedback, whether that be a review, an assessment, suggestions. Everybody has the opportunity for meaningful conversations about the student's achievement. Here I have listed some of the resources that I found in the book about planning or learning functions, timelines, checklists, whatever it is you're looking for, there's probably going to be a resource listed here. So I want to thank you for watching my video and listening to this information. Like I mentioned in the beginning, everything in this presentation was out of the book Reinventing project-based learning, and I highly recommend that teachers go forward with this strategy and encourage students to have some real life experiences. Thank you.